Hey, welcome to Wellteam. It's fantastic to have you on board. Today, we're going to be having a great conversation with a man who's heading up Australasia's health mobility section or wearables market for Garmin Australasia. So if you've ever had questions about wearable technology, what's happening, what's the latest stuff, and in particular around the Garmin range of products, tune in because we've got a great session with Harry. We'll be joined by a number of Wellteam members who are also on the call, and they'll be pitching in some questions as well, including cycling legend Patrick Yonker. We've got Rowan, Adrian, and Daniel all joining us, pitching in questions. So sit back, relax, enjoy this fantastic opportunity to learn a little bit more about Garmin and wearable technology. But let me first start by introducing Harry Gasiamis. He's got 30 years experience in consumer electronics business, and for the last 8 years has been heading up Garmin's health business here in Australasia. So Harry, fantastic to have you on board. Welcome, mate.
Thanks, Troy. Good to be with you, and thanks for asking me along.
Our pleasure, Harry. Look, let's get stuck straight into it. The wearable device sector seems to be in explosive growth at the moment. I was looking at some numbers that suggested 20% growth in recent years, and it really seems to be going through the roof. On what I wonder whether there's a lot of gimmick going on here with how much development is really sitting behind a lot of these products out in market. There's some very big players spending significantly on developing their products. I've used Garmin for many years as a cyclist, and I can see the development in those products. But still, I've got computers from many years ago that are still incredibly accurate and reliable. And I don't see the need in some of those different changes in technology. What's your take on the industry and the sector at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, we've been in this space longer than most people. You know, to be fair, other brands have been quite vocal in the last sort of 6 or 7 years, and have sort of turned it from a specialist sort of product for, you know, enthusiast runners or cyclists or swimmers, whatever, for, you know, the mainstream, I guess. But yeah, I don't know. Look, you know, in the last sort of 10 years, when this has sort of really started picking up, there's been lots of conversations about, you know, technology, and, you know, there was a big push and conversation about, you know, wearable technology implanted into clothing, and, you know, that was going to be massive, you know, for consumers. There was all sorts of discussions around, you know, glasses and hats, and, you know, you can buy sort of earphones now with earbuds with, you know, blood heart rate sort of monitors in them. So, you know, I guess the technology has moved along. There's been lots of things that have been tried. A lot of them haven't really been successful because there's you know, I guess you need to find a use case that's going to mean most people are going to want to use whatever the product is most of the time, as opposed to putting it on for a specialist purpose. And, you know, I think that's probably the biggest telltale. And I think that's been the success of the watch, right? You know, most people would wear a watch most of the time. So having something on your wrist that, you know, does the watch bit and also does all the other stuff becomes quite useful. And it isn't something that, you know, gets in the way. It doesn't, you know, create problems for the wearer. So I think that's probably been the biggest driving force over the last, you know, 10 years. And we've seen that obviously with lots of brands out there. But, you know, what happens in the future, who knows? You know, there's always conversation about all sorts of new technologies. You know, there's continual conversation about implantables, where, you know, they're going to stick chips in your skin, and, you know, you're already sort of doing that a little bit. You know, we have a partnership with a company that does blood glucose monitoring, where they actually, you know, instead of doing a finger prick every day, you just self-implant a probe under the skin, and that just sits there for, you know, a couple of weeks or whatever it is, and then, you know, you put a new one in, and that just does constant blood pressure monitoring. Constant blood glucose monitoring. So, you know, there's all sorts of things going on. So who knows what the next few years will bring.
Yeah, it'd be great to come back to that CGM, the constant continuous glucose monitoring stuff later. I'm sure Pat Yonker will have a few questions about that. It seems to be a big thing, particularly in sport at the moment. There's a lot of metrics that you can get from these devices, and it's extraordinary just what they're able to track. There's very different grades and levels of those monitoring devices. One of the things that I worry about is how much of that information is creating anxiety and overwhelming people looking at it, and how much is the really critical stuff? What's your take on the most important data to be tracking from an overall health perspective?
Yeah, so I think we've sort of seen, obviously the initial measurement was steps. Everyone wanted to find out how many steps they'd done, and that was fantastic. But the whole mindset about if you do 10,000 steps, then you're fantastic, right? Just get 10,000 steps and you're good. And that was the complete focus, in not too distant times, right? But clearly there's a lot of other things that come into play. So we do a lot of work in the sleep space to make sure that we're able to record really good quality sleep metrics. All of our devices will record REM, deep light sleep, and at a very high level of accuracy. We're not talking about toys. We're talking about data that is used by researchers around the world for a variety of different reasons. So the sleep data is a big one. We've for quite a while been able to measure something called heart rate variability, which I won't bore people about, but effectively it's just looking at the variation in your heartbeat. And there's a number of significant relationships between heart rate variability and a number of different metrics. The main one that we work with is stress. So we're able to work out some pretty accurate, data around how stressed an individual is, and relate that back to the user. And when I say stress, I'm not talking about all stress is bad, because my stress is probably going up a little bit now because I'm doing this interview. Rowan probably has his stress jump up when he has to present in front of a committee on something that he's been working on. So stress is good. Some stress is required to perform. Pat would be very familiar with that. But it's a question of being able to work out how you can have downtime during your day. So when you go through those periods of stress, you also be able to have periods of rest where you de-stress and your body's able to, re-energize itself. So we put a lot of effort into stress, and they're probably the two biggest ones. There's a lot of other things that go on, but to your point before about this information, it's all good and well to collect it, but you need to make it. You need to deliver it to the user in a way that they're going to be able to understand it and be able to do something with it. So there's no point just telling you, here's your stress numbers, and then walk away, right? So when we talk to people about their stress, we talk to them about what the stress levels in the day have been like. Have they had periods of low stress as well as periods of high stress? And then we give basic recommendations. So if we see that there's been a very stressful day with very few low stress periods, we'll make some, recommendations on things that they can potentially do to get some downtime, and there's breathing exercises that you can do via the watch, and, some, various other sort of suggestions to maybe meditate, go for a walk, etc. So it's all about making the information or delivering the information in a relatable way, and actually giving people some sort of an idea on what they can do to, improve the score that they're getting, I guess.
And data quality has got to be a pretty critical component to these devices. And there's a really wide range. You can get some very cheap products out there that look like they're doing the job. A heart rate, how hard is it to get heart rate versus heart rate? What's comparable? How much variability is there on the market between all these different devices and all these different sensors?
Oh, significant. I mean, there's the sensor technology is very, very it's varied, right? There's different quality, components that go into all these wearable devices. The reason you can buy one that's really cheap is because it's using cheaper components, right? And they're without a doubt, they're not as accurate. And then there's also a big part of the whole delivery of data is the analysis of the data once it's collected from the sensor, right? So you could get a really good sensor in an expensive product, but have really poor algorithms that take that information and turn it into a number that is relevant to the wearer. And if the science behind the algorithms is not, perfect or very, accurate, then you're going to get poor numbers back. So, whilst we put a lot of effort and, pride ourselves in the quality of our hardware, we also, spend a significant amount of time building algorithms and understanding the science between on how we process the numbers that we capture. And, without, again, going into a lot of details, we spend a lot of time doing side-by-side analysis with, medical grade devices. For example, when we look at sleep, the way that we can validate our sleep records is by being able to put a person into a sleep lab with all the, contraptions connected to their head and their chest, and at the same time have a wearable on their wrist. And then we take the values of both measurements and we're able to see the difference between the two numbers. And in our sleep data, I think the gold standard for accurately detecting a stage of sleep is about 80%, which means that they get the sleep stage correct 80% of the time. So when you're in light or REM or deep sleep, our accuracy is about 75%. So for a $200 product you can stick on your wrist, compared to being connected to $500,000 worth of equipment and having to go and overnight sleep in a lab, that costs a fair bit of money. There's a lot of difference. So yeah, there's a massive difference. People should feel comfortable buying whatever they buy. I'm not going to tell people not to buy something, but it's chalk and cheese. So you have to be. There's a lot of good research out there that people do. A lot of good independent reviewers that talk about products. So people that want to get some good information can go and find some good reviews out there and understand what the difference is between devices.
And I think that's one of the things that I've heard more about is the anxiety that people are developing by tracking their sleep. They never used to have a bad sleep. They put a device on their wrist and now they've got a worse sleep because they're very anxious about their sleep. And I always wonder, if you wake up in the morning and you think you had a good night's sleep and your device tells you that you had a bad night's sleep, who's right?
Well, look, I mean, from personal experience, I can tell you that, I've discovered things about how I sleep and how I feel by looking at the data off my devices and being able to understand that in context with what I've done. So, we've all gone out, enjoyed, 2, 3, 4, maybe more beers with a dinner, one night with some friends or whatever. You'll go home, you might fall into bed and not move for 8 hours and get 8 hours sleep. But if you look at the data off, a heart rate monitor, whether it be, one of our devices or other devices that people have, the changes that are occurring or the way that your body behaves after you've gone out and had a big night, drinking is significantly different to when you don't have a big night drinking. Your body is spending all that night trying to burn off that alcohol instead of actually giving you some good regenerative sleep. And in my example, when I, have a night and I drink, 3, 4, and it doesn't have to be a lot, 3 or 4 beers, doesn't have to be, ridiculous amounts, but I can see the difference in my stages of sleep. And whilst I might sleep for the right amount of time or, 8 hours, it doesn't necessarily mean I'm getting the restorative sleep that I need. And, easily explained, right? We've all gone out, had a big night, go to bed, sleep for a whole heap of time, but wake up in the morning and you feel terrible because your body hasn't actually recovered, right? You've just been trying to burn that alcohol off. So, having said that though, there used to be a lot of conversation about the anxiety and the nervousness that people had by having to look at numbers. And, my feeling on that is if you're going to get anxious, don't wear one, right? Like, we're not mandating that everyone has a wearable and sticks it on their wrist. Like if you're that sort of a personality, then, you should do things that are good for you. So at the end of the day, some people get off on the buzz of seeing the data and being able to understand it, interpret it, and then trying to improve it or, better it the next day, whether it be going for a run or just understanding how well they're sleeping. And some people are completely opposite. So it's a bit of a horses for courses thing.
And in terms of that data, you interact with a lot of scientists, with a lot of elite level people who are using these devices every day as part of research projects. What's the critical stuff that people keep coming back to that tends to correlate with health and well-being? Is there one measure or one marker that everybody's focusing on, saying, well, we're going to shift that?
I think it really depends on what people are doing. And, I mean, I'll be really honest, the wearable is just another bit of data that you can supplement, along with a bunch of other, factors that they're measuring, right? So when we talk to a researcher who's doing a particular project, they may already be getting inputs from a bunch of different things. They might have other medical sensors, that patient is wearing. They may be getting information from a daily survey asking, how do you feel? Did you sleep well? So it's just another data source and another bit of information that they can add to the mix. So, it's really dependent on what people are doing. We have orthopedic surgeons in, all over the world. We've got 3 or 4 really big clinics and groups in Australia who have been using our really basic, $129 just activity tracker, no heart rate, basic sleep. And they just use that to measure steps. They need accurate step measurement, and they give it to patients who are doing hip and knee replacements pre-surgery. They give them a couple of weeks to do some, basic baseline sort of numbers to understand how active they are before their surgery. Then they go and put their new hip in, and then they say, right, Troy, you need to go out and do 2,000 steps today, right? And they can measure that, and then they can hold Troy accountable and say, you know what, you didn't do your 2,000 steps today. Why was that? And then they can work through the rehab program and keep them accountable. So in that instance, and there are thousands of people that are doing that with our devices in Australia today. So, for those people, it's all about steps. They don't care about anything else. I've got people looking at, pulmonary disease, and obviously they're more interested in things like respiration rate, which we can measure, and understanding sleep, and getting data off that. So I think it's really just horses for courses. Again, there's a lot of different projects doing different things, but everyone's got their own sort of take on what they want. The devices deliver a lot of different data, so we've got that ability to, people to use them for quite specific purposes.
Yeah, brilliant. Look, in terms of all the different data, so these devices, there's multiple conversations out there about which light sensor and what grade sensors there are. I'm sure there's a wide variety of sensors, and as there is a wide variety of devices. What are if somebody's in the market for one, what are the key things they should be looking at in order to be able to get something that's good quality and can do the job that they're intending? Of course, it should have the Garmin logo without a doubt, but broader market, where's your view at on that?
Yeah, look, I think, so there's a couple of things. If you're talking about, well, first and foremost, I think you should go, if people are looking to buy something, they should go and do a bit of a look around and get some research done. There's a guy that does technology reviews called DC Rainmaker. He's not aligned with us in any way, but I can see Pat nodding his head. I can tell you, when I want to find out stuff about our products, I go to him, right? He's unbelievable. He's thorough. He uses virtually every product on the market, and he is spectacularly good in being able to give you not only information on the product, but he can show you, exactly what happens when you take it for a run. He'll take screenshots of maps and show you GPS accuracy and how his heart rate compares to the most accurate chest strap that he might have or whatever. So, do your research. People want to record that name, or people want to take note of that name, DC Rainmaker. That's definitely a place I'd be going to get some good information independently on a wearable piece. And then, from there, once you decide on what product you want, I think it's always really important to understand that there are limitations in the technology, right? So it doesn't matter how good it is. If you wear your watch like a bangle, it's not going to work, right? Because the whole premise of those lights that flash on the bottom of the watch is that there's no disruption of the light between the bottom of the watch and the wrist. So people that wear them like a bangle and the thing's floating around on their wrist, there's no accurate data there. So, you might as well discard all that information. So wear the thing properly. Some watches don't have an articulated joint. So, most people wear a watch and it's got like a hinge and two straps attached to either side of the watch face. So having that articulated joint means that you can actually get a really good fit around the wrist to make it, better to wear. There are some challenges with things like skin pigmentation. People that have really heavy tattoos on their wrists might have challenges getting a lot of accurate readings because the light still needs to penetrate the skin and sort of look at the capillaries under the skin. So if it's not able to do that because you've got heavy tattoos on your wrist, then that's going to be a problem. And then there are some just challenges with how the devices are used. So, if you put a watch with a heart rate monitor on the wrist on and go for a run and just use your standard running motion, you're going to get pretty reliable heart rate data because your arms are moving in a sort of uniform pattern. But if you put it on and go and do all sorts of weird, aerobics activities, then your that whole, moving around your arms, like for those who remember the Muppets used to do all this sort of stuff, then you're going to get really bad data because, one of the limitations of wrist-based heart rate is that if you have all those awkward movements, the way that your blood moves through your blood vessels changes and it's throwing out the numbers. So I said before, we put a lot of effort into algorithms. One of the big things that we do is try to work out ways to filter noise. So, and that's something that a cheaper brand just isn't going to do, right? They're not going to invest the, countless hours of development trying to understand, what's a real number and what's a dud number. So, you'll get the noise as well as the good stuff. And then when you put it all together, it doesn't really make much sense. So, so having an ability to understand that is, really important. So, do your research, make sure you're wearing the thing properly, make sure you're using the thing properly. And, hopefully you don't have a sleeve of tattoos that means that, you can't get any light through your wrist and you're not going to pick any information up.
Yeah, brilliant. Look, when I did some research a little while ago and I was really quite surprised to learn that many of these devices aren't picking up your heart rate continuously. They're picking it up as essentially a sample, which could be 5, 10, 15 minutes. And if you're doing a sport or exercise like mountain biking for me, which is highly variable in its activity, and you're pushing hard 1 minute and you're easier the next, you really want to get a good sample of your heart rate over that full period. So with Garmin devices, how does that sampling work? What's the trade-off? Why have you got 15 minutes sample for one and continuous monitoring for another?
Yeah, so I guess the easiest way to answer that is just it comes down to battery life, right? All these measurements, consume battery. So, if you are trying to have, record an activity where you're recording, your heart rate for, or even, you just look at it from a health perspective, right? People put these things on, they're not doing any activities, but they just want to know their general health for the day, with their heart rate and their steps and everything else. So we record constantly throughout the day. We record every bit of information, but we don't necessarily deliver every bit of information back to researchers or the wearer, because the wearer doesn't need to know what their heart rate was at this particular second. They just need to know, averages. So when we record the data, we record the data in a really high definition, but we deliver it in a number that is meaningful, right? Because again, it's not meaningful to tell someone that you did 127 steps between, 1 o'clock and 1:01. They just want to know, did they do 5,000 steps in a day or 10,000 steps in a day, right? So, steps, for example, is a good example. We deliver step data through our data services in 15-minute epochs, right? We don't need to deliver it in minute by minute because it's not relevant for the person who's looking at the data or using it. So every bit of information we collect is measured in the way that is most relevant for that particular metric. So, blood oxygenation, for example, which you get out of the sensors on the bottom, you can have that on all day and get all day blood oxygen levels, or you can just have it on at night, right? Where people that are suffering from sleep apnea may be more interested to see. The difference is that there's a higher battery consumption when the thing's working 24/7 versus when it's working overnight. So that's probably the biggest trade-off, how much battery do you want to consume? And then, when you have a brand like ours, we have batteries that last up to 2 to 3 weeks on certain devices. So you have the flexibility of being able to do it all the time or, less frequently, depending on what you like. You talk about different devices and, quality. Battery life is probably the biggest, one of the biggest things that people should be looking at as well, right? Is because the last thing you want to do is to put something on, have to take it off every day to charge it. You just, people get sick of that sort of behavior. They want to be able to put something on and maybe get a week or two, or at least, 4 or 5 days out of it. So
it's quite funny. So, when I was looking at the Apple Watches some time ago, and by and large, most of the reviews talked about having to recharge your watch overnight because the battery life was woeful on them. And I kind of wonder why you'd buy one if you're not getting that full sleep data. For me, for us, and for Wellteam, recovery is so critical, and being able to measure that. Now, the other thing that when I was speaking to you the other day, you spoke about was the body battery score, which I'm assuming takes into consideration all of those different parameters during the day and your sleep overnight. Can you tell us a little bit about the body battery?
Yeah, so the body battery is just, I guess, the way to give people a bit of a snapshot of everything that's going on. So, you'll look at the watch and it'll say you did 7,000 steps, and it'll say that you had 6 hours worth of sleep, and that your stress has been X amount, and whatever else you're looking at. So, the logical question is fantastic, but what does all that mean, together? Like, am I doing more steps than what I should? Is my sleep good enough? So we take all these numbers that are relevant for a general overall sort of snapshot of how you're sort of doing, and we do the maths and slap them all together and put out what we call a body battery. So the body battery is a way for an individual to basically get an overall picture of how their day's going. So, we give you information that shows, that, you started at a particular level, it's out of 100%. You might have had a really big day. So, at the end of the day, your body battery might be 28% because you've depleted a lot because you went for a big walk around the park in Adelaide on the Sunday, whatever, and you had a really big day out exercising. So you went home that night, you had a quiet night, you read a book, you had a cup of tea, you didn't drink any booze, you had a really good night's sleep. And then when you woke up in the morning, your body battery had replenished, and you'll find that you may have put on 40 or 50 points, right, to get you back up to that sort of 100% level. So it's a good way for people to have a look at what's going on. And I was talking to a colleague today who thought he might have had COVID. He doesn't know yet because he's sort of doing tests and whatever, but he's noticed that in the last few days, his sleep's out, his heart rate's really weird. He's cycling a lot. He's preparing for this cycling event in a couple of weeks. He's got a resting heart rate of about 51 or 52 beats per minute. And he thinks that something weird's going on because his body battery isn't replenishing the way it normally would. So he's just waiting now to see if he's tested positive for COVID. So it'll be interesting to see what he comes back with. But whatever it is, whether it's COVID or not, he's got something going on because he's got a bit of a scratchy throat. He's got a bit of a blocked head. So he's got something happening that's creating not allowing him to recover as best as he normally would.
Is that where the value is with a lot of these things? With, like, I noticed you mentioned the Apple Watches, Troy, but I've got an Apple Watch and I've never had a problem charging it because I come in from a swim, I go and have a shower, stick it on the charger, half an hour, we're good, off we go.
Yeah.
But it's about, I guess, having the device and how you wear it over time, because every company's got their own algorithms and all that sort of stuff. So I think it's the patterns are more important, aren't they, than a reading in isolation?
Yes and no. The patterns are definitely important because you want to see, like I said before, you want to build some sort of like a baseline and understand what your normal is. And then when you deviate off, above or below. But if the data is wrong to start with, then, and your baseline's, going to be a baseline, but it's going to be wrong anyway, right? So you still want a level of accuracy. But, I think at the end of the day, it's all about having the device and making it as, for it to be as useful as it can be for you. Like you talked about recharging it when you come back for a swim. And that's fantastic. Apple make a fantastic product. There's no doubt about that. But most people don't have that, regimen to be able to take it off, put it for a swim. I mean, how many people do you know that don't even charge their phone? And that lasts for, maybe a couple of days, right? You call them, what happened? Oh, I forgot to charge my phone. Oh, okay. So we charge our phones, we charge our iPads, we charge our cordless phones, we charge, our laptops. Now we've got to charge our watches. If you've got wireless headphones, you've got to charge your ear pods. People just, some people are really good and some people are really bad. Like my wife, she's really bad, but she doesn't do a lot of technology, so she won't see this.
I'll delete that out later.
Thanks, Troy.
Thanks, Harry. Look, any other questions?
I think it's with Troy, I mentioned it last week. I think with a lot of this, like there's all different brands and devices and everything. But if you can get everything back to, I guess it all comes back to a standard in some ways. So you look at, let's pick Apple Watch, but I'm not plugging Apple here. It's more like there's steps, there's a conversion to stairs climbed, there's your average heart rates, and so that freedom for anyone to have the device that works for them, because I've had Garmin's as well and absolutely love them because they covered everything. It's like pick the sport, it's on, and you're off. So having it go back and almost be normalized. So for groups like this, if people want to track it, you want something to come back to a normal source. It's like, yep, doesn't matter. Your Garmin, your Sunto, your whatever device, you bring it all the data back, and there's some measure there of your activity. So a group, so you can have a group share. Otherwise, like, I can't see you. You're using Garmin and you're using X. And I think that's where the things like Strava come into it. If you're able to have everything integrated back to another source.
Yeah, I think having the ability to share data with a group, like if you look at your group, right? Like, I don't know what Troy's told you guys, but he's building an app and he's going to do all sorts of cool stuff with data that comes from all sorts of wearables. But at the end of the day, we don't go out and tell people use our data only or our devices only. Otherwise, we don't want to work with you. We understand people have, I'm not going to tell you to take your Apple Watch off because that's what you want to wear, Daniel. That's what it is, right? But at the end of the day, you're right. Having access to community apps or portals or whatever you want to call them, where everyone can, come and see their information and share it, like Strava, is important for some people. We have all the stuff that you talked about you do on your Apple Watch, we do with our product, right? You can see all those numbers. You can create a group in Garmin Connect and get 10 of your mates to go for a cycle and look at stuff. If you want to, you can even be looking at each other in real time, because you can connect to each other's devices via smartphones and do all sorts of really cool things. So, so all that sharing is there. Unfortunately, though, we're never going to work with Apple and let you and me look at a Garmin environment and see, the Apple information on my watch. Yeah. And Apple's not going to do it either, right? So there are third-party applications where you can do that. Strava, Runkeeper, there's a bunch of different things out there that people use. And I guess it's all about understanding what you want to do with the people that you want to do it with, and then looking at the best way to achieve that. And for some people, that is, we're only going to buy Garmin watches. That's it, because we want to be together. For some people, it'll be buy whatever you want to buy, and then we'll just meet on Strava and we'll go for a cycle and, get our stages done, and, we can do all that sort of stuff. So it's horses for courses. Our job as a device manufacturer is to make the best product that gives you the best features, that motivates you to say, the Apple was really cool, but I really like the idea of having, 3 weeks battery life, because when I go on my, international business trips, I don't want to bring a million cables with me because I keep losing them and leaving them in hotels. So I'm going to buy a Garmin watch and I'm going to put it in, in battery saver mode, and it's going to run for 30 days, 60 days. I'm going to get one that's solar powered and it'll last for 60 days, right?
Plus you can do lap swim times. My God. I do miss that.
Well, there's all sorts of stuff, I'm wearing a product now that, it's our Phoenix product, which has been around for ages. It's got a whole heap of different, there's like 30 different sports profiles. I can go and have a hit of golf tomorrow. I can go jump on the bike and go for a cycle. So again, it just depends on what people want to do, and I guess, the biggest question I get is, why should I buy an Apple Watch or should I buy a Garmin? And I'm not going to rubbish at other brands, but for me, I think there are distinct differences between certain products.
Yeah.
You know, Apple have got an ecosystem that works amazingly well if you want to have an iPad and an, you know, MacBook and an Apple Watch and an iPhone, right? So, you know, we're not going to even remotely try and convince you that you should buy a Garmin watch if you think you want to have the best of that Apple environment, because it's Apple, they do it themselves, right? But I can tell you, we've got plenty of customers who've got Apple everything else, and they don't want an Apple watch because they don't want to be able to, you know, send emails on their watch. They want to be able to go and do a 20-hour ultra run on the weekend and have enough juice in their watch to let them do that on GPS and not have to charge it up as they're running around. You know?
Yeah, I think you're right though as well. It's the specialist stuff. You've got generalist devices which do a very purpose, and I agree. It's like, yeah, I think Apple's very generalist versus being specific, whereas the Garmin's as I would argue streets ahead in terms of their specializations and the amount of information and data, and it's geared towards a really good segment. So, and again, look, you come a long way from the ones which are like a big lump on the arm to what they are now. It's just incredible.
Yeah, and look, and I think there's other things that come into play as well. You know, a lot of people, you know, one of the questions we get a lot of time is about privacy and what happens to my data and who owns the data and where does it go. You know, so I think, you know, again, I'm not going to make any judgments on what other people do, but, you know, you should do your research and understand what happens when I connect to a particular, you know, product and I do this, whether it's mine or anyone else's, right? Because, you know, at the end of the day, you know, people, you know, jump on Facebook and they do all the stuff they do with Facebook, and, you know, they do, you know, searches in Google, and, you know, a lot of information is being collected and is being stored and is being, you know, processed and thrown back at you in a number of different ways, whether it be, you know, from an advertising perspective or what have you. So, you know, there are some people that just are really conscious of the fact that, do I want to be giving, you know, my health data to Google? You know, is that something I want to do? They already know where I walk all day because, you know, if I have location services on my phone and it's, you know, it's an Android phone, then they can see everything. You know, if anyone uses an Android phone and you don't know, try it. Go into your Gmail account and have a look at, you know, what you did for the last 20 years that you've been carrying an Android mobile phone. You can see everywhere you went, what time you were there, all over the world. It's, you know, it's amazing, but it's also quite, for some people, concerning. If they're concerned about looking at numbers when they're going to sleep and that causes them anxiety, you know, there's other things to be anxious about too. So I think, you know, a lot of people think about that. So there's a lot of considerations, you know, what are you using it for? Who else do you want to have access to that data? You know, the one big thing that's happening now is there's a lot of discussion around medically approved devices and devices that are, you know, authorized by medical authorities in different countries. You know, so all of a sudden, these consumer electronics products are becoming medically approved devices, right? And the data is then being delivered back to that manufacturer's, you know, servers somewhere and being stored somewhere. So, you know, are people comfortable with that? You know, it's a philosophical question beyond, you know, what we can cover in half an hour, but, you know, these are things that we're going to start talking about. So just as important as what's the next sensor going to look like, and is it going to be implanted under my skin or be on a hat on my head? Where's my information going? Who's getting it? What am I doing with it? You know, these are all conversations that people are having, and I think, you know, it'll continue to be a big topic of discussion as you know, the connection part of the devices grows, because, you know, when you're using it in isolation, it's just you. But if you're then starting to deliver data to Strava or to your, you know, your Apple Health Kit, or, you know, to your whatever, then where's that going? Yes, I do.
My wife uses a Fitbit, and it's probably coming to the end of its life. Her main requirements are sleep monitoring. She loves that.
Yep.
And also heart rate. Recommendation?
Well, look, I mean, if you're talking about our product, everything that we do. So I guess one thing to understand is that when we put a sensor into a watch, there is the same sensor technology goes through the entire series of products, whether you buy the cheapest one or whether you buy the most expensive one. You know, we're assuming here that you're buying products released in the same generation, I guess, right?
Yeah.
So you don't need to buy a $1,500 watch, because a $250 watch is going to give you the same quality data, right? However, what I think is important is to understand what else you're going to possibly do with it. So the backhanded answer to your question is, we have products starting from, depending on what she likes, whether she wants to wear a watch that looks like a watch or looks like a piece of technology. If she goes for a walk with her friends and wants to, monitor that, those walks, record those walks. She might be a swimmer. She might play golf a couple of times a week. So it's really just about understanding what you want to do, and then picking a product that has the feature set that is relevant for your use case. The quality of the heart rate measurement and the sleep measurement isn't really going to vary much over the range of products, assuming you wear the watch correctly. And it's going to be fine. So I could, I'm happy if you want to contact Troy, and you can reach out, and I'm happy to guide you directly about something that might suit your wife. But it's really, and that's probably one of the problems that we have as a brand. We literally have 150 odd different wearables that cover different types of sports. They look different. We have watches that are hybrid watches that actually have analog hands that go around like a conventional watch does with digital. My daughter, my 16-year-old, doesn't like technology on her body. She wants to wear a watch that looks like a watch. So every time I say to her, look at this new cool one that we just released, not interested, Dad. Doesn't have, it's digital. I don't want it. So everyone's got their own little quirk about what appeals to them. But in terms of the quality of the data, it's going to be consistent across the board.
Yep.
Will there be a Garmin watch that, because I go to the mountains quite a bit, with the oximeter built in to the watch? Is there anything on the market with an because as we get higher in altitude, above 3,500 meters, we usually use oximeters, but it'd be really good to have something accurate, because obviously I have the watches, but the oxygen saturation of the blood is important, and also the heart rate. The Garmin accuracy is excellent, but it would be great to have the oxygen saturation measured.
So the oxygen saturation is part of everything that we've done since, I think, 2019, maybe. If you buy a Phoenix 7 or Phoenix 6X model, so the X models are the ones with the bigger screens, they actually have a acclimation app in them. So it's actually it's designed for mountaineering. So it's specifically built for exactly what you want. So you put the watch on your wrist, you go and do what you do. And if your oxygen levels start getting too low, you'll actually get an alert on the watch to tell you to either, start descending or, put oxygen on, so that you can keep climbing. So all that is, it's built in. So the watch you're looking for is a Phoenix model watch, and we've just released the Phoenix 7. So the Phoenix 7X or even the Phoenix 6X. So the X denotes it's the bigger size watch face, because it's obviously easier to look at when you're 2, 3, 4, 5, 6,000 meters up in the sky. So yeah, that's the product that'll 100% do exactly what you're looking for.
And then the glucose monitoring is very, very interesting. They're looking at banning it in professional sport already. It's already made the headlines. But I think for people every day who are not athletes at all, it's also very important, because I think all of a sudden they become more accountable for what they put in their mouth. And when you know what your glucose levels are we far away?
So glucose is one of the holy grails, right? Probably along with blood pressure. And the problem is, there are a number of people that are talking about they're close, but, it's easy to say and, a lot harder to deliver. How do you do a non-invasive glucose test, right? So that's the question. So that product that I mentioned before is...
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so that is so what's happened there is that there are blood glucose sensors already in the market, right? So you can go and buy a finger prick, and you can do a finger prick test, stick it in a little machine, and it gives you a number, right? And if you're a diabetic, you have to do that depending on your condition, multiple times a day, so you can understand what's happening. And then you have a little bit of insulin, or whatever you need to do to try and make sure that your insulin and your blood glucose levels are stable, right? They're not fluctuating up and down. So what's happened is, in the last few years, they've started building these, injectable. They're subcutaneous, right? You inject the sensor under the skin, usually goes in, in your belly or somewhere where there's a bit of, fat around, not just into muscle. And that sits under the skin. And normally what happens is that talks to a screen that the companies will make, and shows the user the number, and they can see that information there. And in some instances, they even have deposits on their, or little other things on their skin that are sort of taped to their skin, and they can inject tiny bits of insulin sort of according to the numbers that are coming off this sensor, right, to give you that. So what we've done in the last couple of months, or last 6 months, we've built a relationship with the Dexcom, I think we're called, or Dexion, I can't remember now. I'm terrible for getting their name wrong, but they're able to deliver that information that's coming from the sensor that's implanted under the person's skin to one of our watches. So the use case for us is not necessarily around someone who's suffering a medical problem and wants to be able to monitor it. It's good because if you've got a Garmin watch, you can see it on your wrist, but it is actually designed for people that are athletes who suffer from diabetes to be able to see what's happening to their blood glucose levels whilst they're exercising. As having the ability to understand what your blood, is doing and how much sugar's in it, is necessary. And then you see people, taking obviously supplements and, glucose gels and all that sort of stuff. So, the average punter who isn't scientifically aware of how his body reacts when they exercise, or her, can go out and do some intensive exercising. They can have this sensor in, under their skin. They've got their Garmin watch on, and they can see what's going on with their blood glucose, and they can do things on the fly to make sure that their levels stay constant. I 100% see how the pros would ban it, because, it's too much information, right? And it's, but it isn't, the relationship we've built with these guys isn't about, improving sports performance. It's about preventing someone who's going for a run, who's got, who's diabetic,
Type 1 diabetes, something.
Yeah, not collapsing, in the middle of Rundle Mall when he's doing the, Adelaide Marathon or whatever he's doing, and dying, right? Because, he's just completely unaware of what's going on with his body, as he's obviously having this intensive exercise, where he's consuming all this energy. So it's interesting. There are a number of people that we're talking to now who keep telling me that they're really close to coming up with sensors that can just go onto the skin like a Band-Aid, and they can pick up all sorts of stuff, and they're getting information from sweat that's coming off the body. But I think there's there's a little bit of way to go.
Okay, guys, look, we are out of time. It's been absolutely fantastic having you join us today, Harry. And great to have our members along, having Pat here, Daniel, Rowan, and Adrian. Thanks for your contributions as well. It's fantastic when our members get active in these conversations. And we're all out here to learn more about these devices. And before you go, I just wanted to say, look, Garmin have been fantastic for me over time. I've got this little Edge 500, which I think I must have bought back in 2012, doing a lot of road cycling. It's been with me all these years. It's been accurate. It's been reliable. It's certainly been very durable. A number of times I've fallen off, it's still stayed together. And if you're out there looking for devices like this, you can't go wrong with Garmin. They really are good quality products. But thanks again, Harry. Brilliant insight. And thanks for sharing so much of your knowledge with us here today. And thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you very much for having me. I've enjoyed the conversation. It's always good to chat. And as I said, if anyone's got any other questions, you want to reach out to Troy, happy for you to pass on my details, Troy, and we can have an offline discussion if anyone's got anything in particular they want to talk about.
Last thing, don't forget to press the subscribe button. It's really important. Press subscribe, makes us look good. But importantly, any of our new content, you'll get an email reminder that it's arrived, so you can go and check it out and make sure you're up to date with the latest in wellbeing from Wellteam. Go well.